They built it with polished lies, dressed it in prestige, sealed it with ceremonies and chains, this so-called system, a place where obedience is currency and silence is status. Every hallway scripted, every handshake rehearsed. A world where uniformity is God and curiosity is crucified. Their masterpiece of monotony, neat, quiet, unquestioned. They called it flawless. I call it a coffin with golden hinges. You were supposed to fit in like a puzzle piece that never complains. But you didn't click. You cracked. You splintered. You whispered blasphemy in a room full of priests pretending to be professors. And they hated you, not because you were wrong, but because you saw too much. You didn't just see the cracks. You touched them. You traced them with your fingers, like a blind prophet reading the end of their fairy tale. You didn't yell. That would have been easy to dismiss. No, you listened. You watched. You learned. You swallowed their commands and spit back blueprints. You weren't a rebel. You were a redesign. Not a loud voice, but a shift in gravity. A glitch in their rhythm. They built their machine on predictability, and you became the unpredictable echo bouncing through their perfectly silent halls. They wanted order. You gave them distortion. Their rules were forged in fear, elegant chains that wrapped around thoughts and called them progress. Don't stand out. Don't dream too loud. Don't ask why when how is easier to swallow. The system didn't just kill ideas. It embalmed them, dressed them up in suits, and paraded them around as traditions. They labeled it culture, heritage, stability. But beneath the surface was rot. And you were the crowbar. The reminder that rot doesn't disappear when you paint over it. It festers, it waits, and one day, it speaks. You didn't come in with fire. You came in with questions. You didn't shout, "Burn it down." You whispered, "What if it's already dead?" That's the kind of heresy they can't forgive. You weren't loud, you were lethal, subtle, surgical. A slow, smiling dismantling of everything they thought was untouchable. You peeled their values back like skin, and underneath, there was nothing but nerves, twitching, terrified, exposed. Because deep down, they always knew. The system was never built to last. It was built to control. And control? It only works on those who believe in the bars of the cage. But you stopped believing. You saw that their rules were written in pencil, not stone. And instead of erasing them, you rewrote them in ink they couldn't wash away. Your defiance wasn't noise. It was narrative. A new script in a play they thought they had closed. You became the sequel they never authorized. The plot twist no one wrote. A walking contradiction wrapped in clarity. The moment they realized you weren't confused, they panicked. Because when someone walks into your temple and doesn't kneel, you don't see rebellion. You see a mirror. You see a future that doesn't need your past. They tried to bring you back in line with advice, warnings, threats, disguised as mentorship. But you smiled without flinching. You made eye contact when you were supposed to look down. You questioned the sacred. You made the high priests of their perfection sweat under their robes of authority. And the more you didn't break, the more they did. Their meetings grew longer, their smiles tighter, their rules thicker. Every new policy was a prayer to a God already dead. You weren't breaking the system. You were showing that it had already collapsed under its own hypocrisy. You were just the echo that revealed the silence. And the silence was deafening. They called you unstable, dangerous, an anomaly. But anomalies are only dangerous to those who live in fear of variance. You weren't the virus, you were the immune response, a natural consequence of too many lies worn as uniforms. They treated you like a threat, not because you threatened lives, but because you threatened roles. You rewrote the script, and suddenly no one knew their lines anymore. The actors froze, the director wept, and the audience? They started to think. That's the real crime in their eyes. Thought without permission. Because you proved something they never wanted revealed. That this flawless system they worshipped was built on collective pretending. That the rules only worked if everyone agreed to play dead. That order is not peace, it's paralysis. And you weren't paralyzed. You moved, you created, you cracked the rhythm. You laughed, not for humor, but for revelation. You were the first domino to fall intentionally. And in that collapse, others saw a path. You didn't need a revolution. You were one. Not in slogans or parades, but in presence. In questions asked at the wrong time. In silence held too long. In eye contact that screamed louder than any protest. You became the permission they were all too afraid to ask for. The living proof that they could stop pretending. And that is what terrified them most. Not your rebellion, your influence. You see, systems don't fear destruction. They fear replacement. And you, with your rewired mind and your unapologetic stride, didn't just poke holes in their curtain. You built a new stage behind it. A place where truth didn't need translation, where masks melted, where roles were optional. You didn't wait for an invitation. You redefined the gathering. No podium, no leader, just clarity, brutal, blinding clarity. They tried to silence you next, cut your mic, close your chapters, erase your ink. But you had already infected the code. Others had seen. Others had felt it, the weight of the lie, the thrill of stepping outside it. And now the infection spreads, quietly, organically, in coffee shops and classrooms, in midnight thoughts and morning doubts. You didn't bring a war, you brought a question. And questions, once released, don't go back in the box. Their flawless system was built like a maze, but you didn't play to escape. You studied the walls, you mapped the patterns. Then you rose above it. You built wings from every failure they handed you. You stitched them from rejection, from isolation, from the guilt they tried to wrap around your throat like a noose. And once you flew, others saw it was possible. Suddenly the maze didn't feel so sacred. Suddenly, people stopped running and started thinking, what if the exit isn't forward, but up? And now they scramble. They tighten the rules. They sharpen the punishments. They speak louder because they know they've already lost the room. They offer apologies laced with poison. They dress up conformity as evolution. But the virus is loose. The rewrite has begun. You changed the language. You hacked the script. You made obedience look outdated and freedom inevitable. And the best part? You're not done. Not even close. Because a true rewrite doesn't stop at the page. It becomes the pen. And you became the ink. Not just a participant, but a pulse. Not a defector, but a detonator. Every step you take is a crack across their porcelain pavement, their manicured reality, their curated utopia of numb smiles and recycled morals. You didn't escape the system, you infected it. You walked back in, unchained, untouched, and unafraid. And that is a language they can't translate. Because once you've seen beyond the veil, you don't kneel to shadows. You aren't the resistance. You're the reminder. The one who proves that truth doesn't beg, it bleeds through walls. You didn't shout revolution. You whispered, "What else have they hidden from you?" And that's all it took. A single whisper in a room full of actors to make the whole play collapse. You didn't bring fire. You revealed the gasoline they'd been sitting in for decades, and now they scramble to smother sparks with doctrine and dogma. But it's too late. People have already started to smell the smoke. See, they thought their system was eternal because they never imagined someone walking away from it, not in rage, but in realization. They prepared for riots, but not revelations. They expected fists, not freedom. And freedom, real freedom, doesn't shout. It echoes, quietly, patiently, infectiously. That's what you gave them, a glimpse, not of chaos, but of choice. You became the proof that none of this was necessary. The endless meetings, the performance evaluations, the dress codes pretending to be discipline, the culture of fear masked as excellence. You exposed the ritual for what it was, a carousel of approval built to sedate minds and amputate originality. They taught people to chase gold stars like starving dogs chasing scraps. And when you walked in, starless and whole, they couldn't comprehend how you still stood tall. You weren't playing to win, you were playing to wake them up. And now they hate you. Not because you broke the rules, but because you showed them they could have stopped obeying them a long time ago. Their flawless little hierarchy, where the loudest liar becomes the wisest elder, where the most obedient traitor becomes the most celebrated citizen. It only works if no one questions the blueprint. But you questioned it. You burned it. And then, instead of running, you sat on the ashes and asked others, now what? They don't know how to respond to that. You didn't bring a plan. You brought a possibility. They can crush a plan. They can infiltrate it, demonize it, dilute it. But a possibility? A possibility is dangerous. It infects without form. It survives without leadership. And the possibility you released is now slithering through the cracks, through the hands of janitors and CEOs, through artists and accountants, rebels and realists. It has no shape, no slogan, just a shared suspicion. This doesn't have to be the way it is. And suddenly, their weapons don't work anymore. Guilt doesn't bite. Shame doesn't stick. Promotion doesn't seduce. Exile doesn't sting. You've rewritten the currency of control. You made exile feel like escape. You made dismissal feel like rebirth. You made failure feel like clarity. And clarity is addictive. People taste it once, and they never see change the same way again. You didn't just rewrite the rules. You rewrote the rewards. You turned their praise into a punchline. You stripped status of its silk and showed it for what it really is, a leash with glitter on it. And now, the ones who still chase it look like fools playing dress-up in a world that's waking up. The masks are slipping. The applause is thinning. You pulled the curtain, and all that's left is the wires, the puppeteers, the stains on the carpet. They tried to say you were unstable, but it's not instability that makes someone dangerous. It's clarity. And you see everything now. The system was flawless? No, it was fragile. Its strength was never in truth. It was in tradition. And tradition, when unexamined, is just inertia with better marketing. But you broke the momentum. You halted the wheel. Not with violence, but with a question. A calm, treasonous undeniable question. What if there's more? And now their entire kingdom is haunted by that whisper, that doubt. Because you didn't just question them, you questioned you. And that's the part that rewrote everything. You dug through your own conditioning. You dissected every should, every must, every because I said so that was embedded in your bones. You stared down the programming and ripped it out, vein by vein. That kind of rebellion isn't visible, it's viral. It spreads in silence, in sleepless nights, in cracked mirrors and long stares. And it leaves you transformed, not loud, not angry, just awake. And an awakened soul in a sleeping system? That's a time bomb. You didn't dress the part. You didn't play the game. You walked in with chaos stitched into your coat and clarity in your eyes. And people noticed. They always do. Even the quiet ones, the watchers, the doubters, the almost believers, they felt you. And once someone feels you, they can't unfeel it. You weren't a message. You were a mirror. And everyone who looked at you had to confront the version of themselves they buried to survive this machine. And now, the buried are rising, quietly, without warning. People are starting to ask weird questions in meetings. They're hesitating before clapping. They're skipping the script. They're looking each other in the eyes a little longer, a little harder, like they're trying to remember something ancient, something true. They're beginning to recognize each other again, not by titles, but by truth, by energy. And energy doesn't lie. You made energy real again. They'll never admit it, but they study you now. They archive your words. They mimic your defiance in watered-down versions, trying to reclaim the crowd you stole. But it's too late. Because people don't want more leaders. They want proof. Proof that it's possible. And you've become that proof. You showed that you don't need permission to live fully, that you don't need approval to be real. That power isn't given, it's remembered. And once remembered, it never fades. It only grows. It spreads like a storm whispering through steel. And the steel is trembling now, because it knows the weather's changed. The sun doesn't shine the same. The air tastes different. It's no longer theirs. And just like that, their flawless system begins to feel irrelevant. And irrelevance is a slow death. A death not by explosion, but erosion. You're not kicking down doors. You're removing hinges. You're not marching in streets. You're unraveling foundations. And foundations rot quietly until one day, everything built upon them just collapses. And when it does, you won't dance in the rubble. You'll be too busy building the blueprint they said could never exist. A blueprint not for another system, but for freedom that doesn't need one. And now, they're standing on the edge of the cliff, staring into an abyss that once seemed impossible to reach. The abyss isn't deep, it's just wide. Wide enough to swallow everything they thought they knew. Every illusion, every certainty, every polished doctrine they held on to so desperately. All of it gone. Because when you rewrite the rules, you don't just erase the past, you erase their future. You make it unpredictable. The more they try to reclaim control, the more they reveal their weakness. They clutch at their fragile constructs like desperate children, clinging to their blankie, too afraid to let go, too terrified to face what lies beyond the comfort of familiar chains. And you watch. You don't mock. You don't laugh. Because the moment of collapse isn't about cruelty. It's about clarity. You gave them clarity, not the clarity of answers, but the clarity of questions. You made them see that their cage was built from the bones of their own ignorance. And now that they've tasted it, now that they've felt that weight, they'll never walk through the world the same. They tried to make you the enemy. They tried to make your disobedience the disease. But it's never the rebel who's the threat. It's the revelation they bring. It's the realization that everything can change with a single breath, a single glance, a single word. And that's what you did. You became the voice of the unspoken truth, the silent shift, the quiet uprising that can't be suppressed by money or power or prestige. And now the question hangs in the air, thick like fog. What comes next? You don't have the answer. You never did. That was never the point. You didn't want to create a new system. Systems are still traps, after all. You wanted to break the illusion of systems altogether, to strip away the crumbling facade and show the world it can breathe without it, that the mind can be free without approval, that life doesn't have to be earned through struggle, but lived through authenticity. They didn't break you. They thought they could. They thought they could drown you in their chaos, choke you with their expectations. But you learned how to thrive in chaos. It's all you ever knew. The system thought it could control you by making you feel small, by labeling you an outcast, by pushing you to the margins. But you turned those margins into the center of everything. You grew stronger in their shadow until their light was irrelevant. And now, they fear you. They fear you more than they fear their own reflection, more than they fear their own demise. Because you've shown them that everything they built, everything they guarded so desperately, was never more than a house of cards. One gust of wind, one moment of doubt, and it all comes crashing down. And it wasn't you who made the wind blow. No, the wind had always been there. You just felt it. You saw the cracks. You heard the silence where their words should have been. And you stood tall in the midst of their chaos, laughing. Not because you enjoyed their fall, but because you knew it had always been inevitable. You were just the catalyst, the one who finally gave them the courage to look at the truth they were too terrified to see. They can try to rebuild. They can try to patch up the holes with more lies, more power, more manipulation. But the truth has already made its mark. It's lodged deep into the minds of the people, like a seed planted in the soil. And when a seed takes root, it doesn't matter how many times they pull it out. It always comes back, stronger, greener, unstoppable. The system they clung to, it's crumbling. And as it does, the air tastes sweeter. The world feels clearer. People are starting to realize that they don't need a system to survive. They just need each other. They just need truth. And when you stand tall in the wreckage of everything they tried to control, you realize something crucial. You didn't just change the world, you freed it from its own chains. And now that it's free, it can't go back. Not to the lies, not to the manipulations, not to the glossy facades they tried so desperately to sell. No, the truth is out. The rules have been rewritten, and now no one can unsee it. The game is over. And the players? They've become spectators. They stand at the edges, watching as the world they tried to mold breaks apart in slow motion. They see their own flaws reflected in the rubble, and they know that they can never rebuild it the way it was. Because once the illusion of control is broken, you can't pretend it was ever real. But you don't look back. You don't need to. You're not here to fix their mess. You're here to show them that there's another way. One that doesn't require control. One that doesn't need walls and borders and divisions. You've already crossed into that new world where the rules are yours to rewrite, where you get to choose your own path, unburdened by their laws, their lies, their limitations. And the moment they tried to cage you was the moment they signed their own sentence. Because you were never supposed to be caged. You were born to outgrow their tiny little world. Born to defy the mold they tried to cast you in. Born to be the exception, the outlier, the disruption that shakes everything to its core. They tried to make you conform. They tried to make you bend. But what they didn't realize is that some people were never meant to be tamed. And when the untamed soul walks freely, the entire world has no choice but to bend around it. So here you stand, standing above their crumbling empire, not as a conqueror, but as a reminder. A reminder that systems are fragile, that perfection is a myth, that the rules we follow are nothing but illusions built by those too afraid to ask what if. You walked in, exposed the lie, and now you walk out. Free. The world is changing. The people are changing. And as for them, they will forever be chasing after a future that no longer exists, trying to stitch together the remnants of their broken creation. But you're already writing the next chapter. You're already beyond them, beyond their grasp, beyond their reach. And the greatest part? You never needed their rules. You just needed the truth.